Hi, today we will explain the storyline of the film Greta released in 2018. Well, let's get straight to the story. A middle-aged woman gets ready to do her activities at a subway station. On the other hand, a young woman named Frances McCullen summarizes her day's activities as usual. She works as a night shift waitress at a restaurant. Every day, Frances takes the subway to get to and from work. One day, Frances found a woman's tote bag lying on one of the benches that seemed to have been accidentally left behind. Frances picked up the bag and intended to hand it over to the station's left behind section. However, since it was very late at night, there was no one around. Frances decided to take the bag home. Frances was staying with her best friend Erica. Erica asked Frances how her work was that day. After making small talk, Erica's attention moved to the girl's bag that Frances had brought home. Frances said she would return it tomorrow. Erica couldn't understand her friend's attitude because the contents could have been suspicious. Erica invited Frances to search the contents of the bag and find out who the owner was. Frances initially hesitated because she felt it was inappropriate. However, Erica felt that there was nothing wrong with the person who found the bag opening it. Finally, they both opened the bag and found several items such as wallets and medicines. From the wallet, Frances got the owner's name and address. Erica and Frances then went to the cinema. At the beginning of the film, Erica asked Frances when she would write to her father. However, Frances seemed reluctant. Erica reminded her that Frances's father kept leaving messages. Unnoticed, Frances shed tears missing her deceased mother. Jokingly, Erica said she could take her mum. The next day, Frances went to the house of a middle-aged woman named Greta alone. Greta welcomed Frances kindly and suddenly thanked Frances for returning her bag. Greta admitted that she had been looking for the bag since yesterday. As a token of gratitude, Greta invited Frances in for coffee and a quick chat. After all, the train station was quite far from her house. She felt Frances deserved a treat. Although reluctant, Frances accepted Greta's invitation. Greta brought a cup of black coffee to Frances and then began to make small talk about Frances's origins. Vaguely, Frances heard a noise coming from the house next door and the sound of the metronome on the piano. Greta said it was the neighbor who was renovating the house. She yelled at her neighbor to turn the sound down. While chatting, Frances also looked through some of the photo displays in Greta's house. They talked about Greta's late husband and her daughter Nicola. Greta then invited Frances to sit by the piano, accompanying her to play her favorite melody, Liszt. She admits that her late husband taught her to play the piano. While playing, Greta recounts how her husband started to get sick while teaching her piano. This made Greta a little sad. Greta then shared that she had a daughter who was now studying at the art school in Paris. To divert attention, Frances then asked about the photo of the dog displayed on the piano. Greta said that it was her favorite dog, Jojo. Frances asks if Greta would like to have another dog. Greta says she would, but she's not good at choosing them. Frances doesn't take offense at Greta's refusal. Instead, she offers to accompany Greta to choose a dog if Greta changes her mind. They then exchange mobile phone numbers. The next day, Greta called to take Frances to the dog shelter on Saturday. Hearing this, Erica thought it was ridiculous that Frances would go with a woman she barely knew. Long story short, they arrived at the abandoned animal shelter. Greta chose an old dog to euthanize. She named him Morton. After picking up Morton, they sit in the garden. Frances teaches Greta to take pictures with her mobile phone camera so she can send pictures to her son. In return, Greta asked if Frances is close to her mum. Sadly, Frances replied that her mum had passed away last year. Unbeknownst to Frances, Greta was not clueless at all. She can open Facebook and find out about Frances. At the next meeting, the two of them met at church to accompany Greta to pray. On the way home, Frances noticed Greta on the phone with Nicola. They looked familiar and made Frances smile. They then returned to Greta's house where Greta resumed playing the piano. Here, Frances realizes that perhaps her friendship with Greta will end soon. However, Greta assured her they would remain friends. After all, Frances is a loyal friend. She admits that her loyalty is like chewing gum that keeps sticking. At the weekend, Erica invited her to go to a party, but Frances refused because Greta invited Frances to have dinner together. Erica felt very disappointed and offended by Frances's sudden change in attitude because of Greta. She suspected that Frances's attitude was because she was trying to find a replacement figure for her mother. Frances couldn't believe her best friend could think that. However, she chose to forget about it. Frances arrived at Greta's house. Greta did the cooking, Frances helped set the table. They would use some candles on the table. Frances asked where Greta kept the candles. From the kitchen, Greta replied that the candles were in the cupboard. Frances opened the door of the first cupboard she saw. The cupboard did not hold candles, but several bags of the same color, shape, and size as the ones Frances had returned. Frances felt something was off after reading some of the names on the back of the bags, including her own. She immediately closed the cupboard door and hurriedly grabbed a candle from the next shelf. During dinner, Frances was silent to hide what she had just seen. This time, she saw Greta differently, no longer a kind mother, but someone to be shunned. The dinner became awkward as Frances began to worry. She was afraid to eat Greta's soup. However, she didn't dare say anything to Greta. Frances finally asked permission to go home because she wasn't feeling well. Greta tried to hold her back and offered her medicine. However, Frances insisted on going home. At home, she told Erica about the bag. Erica already thought there was something strange about the woman, but Frances wouldn't listen. Frances thought Greta did it on purpose because she was too lonely and hoped that someone who found it would come to return it. For that reason, she decided to keep her distance from Greta. She didn't answer Greta's phone calls the next day, which kept leaving missed calls. Not only that, Erica said that Greta called the apartment. Greta herself kept trying to meet up with Frances. She desperately went to Frances at her workplace and asked why she didn't return her messages or calls. Of course, Frances didn't want to tell her why she wasn't replying and left Greta's messages alone. Frances finally mentions the bag she saw in the cupboard. Greta stalls her explanation and asks Frances not to misunderstand. However, Frances doesn't want to be lied to anymore. She kicked Greta out and broke off her friendship with Greta. After work, Greta was waiting for Frances in the subway car. Frances spontaneously got off the train and looked for an alternative way to get to work. She also rode her bicycle to get around. The next morning, Greta left a message to explain why she was acting strangely. She said she felt lonely since Nicola had left for university. She hoped Frances would call her back. As a sign of peace, Greta sent flowers, but Frances rejected them. However, Greta remained persistent in approaching Frances. She approached Frances at the restaurant where she worked. At first, she just stood across the restaurant and observed Frances inside. This made Frances very upset and reported her to the police. However, again, the police could not help. In fact, they thought she was harmless and just looking for attention. One evening after work, Frances found Greta waiting in front of her apartment. Frances again tried to shoo Greta away, but Greta argued that she was very lonely. Frances wouldn't listen to that. Greta demanded an explanation as to why Frances was avoiding her, even though Frances had promised to continue to be friends with her. Greta continued to assure her that she loved Frances very much, but still, Frances pushed her away. However, Greta's reaction was something Frances never expected. She melted the gum she was chewing into Frances's hair. Before leaving, Greta swore Frances would get her comeuppance. Frances recounted the incident to Erica. Exasperated, Erica helped Frances pick up the stuck gum with difficulty. They then went to the police station to report Greta. However, the officer in charge said he could not issue a stay-away warrant because there was no strong evidence. Erica was frustrated that the chewing gum was not enough evidence. The police said they could ask for a stay-away warrant, but it would take a long time. Inevitably, Frances could only take care of herself and stay as far away from Greta as possible. Meanwhile, Frances was worried about Morton's fate. She went to the animal shelter to ask what she could do if she was worried about the dog's safety. The shelter said they could help if there was photographic or other evidence. Secretly, Frances went through Greta's rubbish bin to find something she could use as evidence. Instead, she found letters for Nicola that were returned to sender. Frances then took one and looked up Greta's daughter's number. Greta is still trying to contact Frances. Not out of ideas, Greta scared Frances more seriously. One night, she sent photos from various angles of Erica drinking at the bar alone. Frances called Erica to warn her and told her to get out of the bar immediately. After several attempts, Erica finally picked up the phone. They continued talking until Frances picked Erica up in the middle of the street. A few days later, a girl called Alexa texted Frances back and agreed to meet her at the cafe. Alexa told her that Nicola had died a long time ago by suicide. Nicola couldn't stand her mother enough to take her own life, especially what Greta did to her as a child, where she locked Nicola in a box. Greta came again on a different night. This time, she came to eat. She asked to be served by Frances and didn't want anything else. Despite explaining the situation, the restaurant manager couldn't do anything about it. Frances was forced to remain professional and take down Greta's order. Greta ordered an appetizer drink that Frances recommended. However, when the drink was delivered, Greta made a scathing comment that the drink was disappointing, just like Frances. Frances tried not to be provoked and left Greta, but the woman went berserk. She slammed the glass and table and swore at Frances. Greta's attention-grabbing reaction was eventually reported to the police. Shortly after, Greta was taken away by paramedics and tied to a bed. Frances felt she could breathe a sigh of relief after Greta was temporarily detained. The next day, she called the police station to confirm that Greta was still in custody. However, she was very upset to hear that Greta had been released. Erica gave Frances an idea on how to slowly disappear from Greta's life forever. She told Frances to lie in front of Greta and say that she was moving to another country. For that reason, Frances couldn't see Greta. Erica said it was an easy task. Frances agreed to meet Greta at the church on Friday. Usually, Greta would light a candle to pray for her husband. The day arrived. Greta listened to Frances with all her heart, and at first glance she believed her. They agreed to move on peacefully. However, on the day Frances was supposed to leave, she had a nightmare. In her dream, she was heating a cup of coffee in the microwave while waiting for her father to pick her up. She had also said goodbye to Erica. Not long after, Frances's father came to pick her up. She went out with her suitcase and entered the lift. However, the lift suddenly lost control and Frances screamed in panic, realizing it was about to collapse. Fortunately, it was just a dream. Frances thought she woke up in her dark room. Around her were dolls. She realized this was not her room. She tried to get out, but she was trapped in a large crate. Frances woke up again. This time she was actually in her quiet apartment. Her coffee had just finished warming up in the microwave. She sipped her coffee for a moment, then froze at the sound of dripping water. As if in a dream, someone had just watered her plants. However, Erica wasn't home. Before she could find an answer, Frances felt so dizzy that she fell over. Her vision blurred slowly, and Greta appeared. She knew Frances had lied to her. Frances was unable to resist. She lay motionless. Greta picked her up and asked the doorman to call a taxi. She said her niece was sick and she would take her home with her. Before long, Frances woke up in a crate full of dolls. She screamed in panic and kicked the crate, begging to be let out. Greta opened the crate and told her to come out. For days, Frances was made to learn how to cook, play the piano, and speak Hungarian. For a few days, Frances was locked in a room and treated like the daughter Greta used to be. She also took Greta's mobile phone and sent holiday photos to Frances's father so that he wouldn't look for them. One day, Frances's father visited Erica and Frances's apartment. Erica opened the door and was confused by the sudden arrival of Frances's father. Chris was equally confused as Frances said she was on holiday with Erica. From here, both agreed that Frances was in danger. Chris hired a private detective named Brian Cody to investigate a woman named Greta Heidig. Brian obtained Greta's curriculum vitae and reported it to Chris. From the data, Greta had worked as a nurse. However, she was fired after being caught misusing anesthetic supplies from the hospital. Greta's criminal record was clean. Chris then told Brian to investigate more about Frances at Greta's house at any cost. Frances kept looking for a way to escape from Greta. After being held captive for a few days, she learned a few Hungarian terms and the cuisine. Greta also taught her the piano and did not hesitate to hit her fingers if she made a mistake. Greta found an opportunity to escape while they were cooking. In one powerful stroke, Frances slashed Greta's little finger with the cookie cutter. Greta screamed in pain, while Frances searched for the front door key. Unfortunately, she failed to find a way out and was caught again. The next day, Brian came to Greta's house. Coincidentally, Greta had just returned from taking Morton for a walk. Greta invited Brian to have coffee and talk more casually inside. With misgivings, Brian entered and responded to Greta's chat naturally, until Greta suddenly excused herself to the back. Brian immediately moved to squeeze through any cracks that might be hiding Frances. Unfortunately, Greta had anticipated this. In a surprise attack, she injected Brian with anesthetic. Brian tried to shoot Greta, but his shots always missed. Slowly, he lost consciousness. After Brian died, Greta rushed to bag his body and lower it into the basement. After that, she tidied up the remains of Brian's blood and patched up the gunshot holes in Greta's room. After some time, Greta searched for a new victim using the same method. After a few hours, a short-haired girl knocked on Greta's door. She returned the bag and agreed to Greta's request to have coffee with her. The girl claimed to be from Texas and was starting her career as a model. In the middle of the conversation, Greta suddenly felt very dizzy and her vision blurred. She collapsed. The girl then revealed who she was. She was Erica, who had spent hours traveling around the subway to find Greta's bag. She also dripped so much anesthetic into Greta's coffee that Greta couldn't wake up. While Greta was helpless, Erica rushed to find Frances. Frances heard Erica's voice and screamed at the top of her lungs to let her know she was in the room behind the piano. Since she was tied up, Frances shook the bed as hard as she could against the wall until the metronome sounded. In this way, Erica discovered Frances's location. Without further delay, she broke the door open. She was touched to see Frances's pale and frightened condition. Suddenly, the vinyl disc in the living room lit up. Frances immediately backed away because she was afraid it was Greta. Erica told her to wait while she checked. Sure enough, Greta was no longer there. Erica walked slowly but cautiously looking for Greta. Greta suddenly tried to attack Frances, but of course she was easily subdued. After beating Greta up, Frances says she has a better idea. They work together to put Greta in a crate, then lock it with a display of the Eiffel Tower.